Ned Stark rose from a restless sleep in the solar he had claimed for himself within the looming sprawl of Harrenhal. Dawn's first gray light filtered through the high, narrow windows, giving shape to the vast and half-ruined chamber. The night's wind had howled across the melted towers, rattling loose shutters, and distant thunder had whispered of storms still to come. Though he had expected no solace in these walls, given all the tales of curses and ghosts, it was not Harrenhal's grim reputation that had disturbed his sleep, but rather the weight of choices looming before him. Every night, he found himself haunted by images of Sansa locked in some cold room of the Red Keep, or menaced by King Joffrey's hateful whim. The Queen's missives had been unyielding, offering no negotiation except the demand that Jaime Lannister be freed outright. It was an impossible impasse, one that forced Ned and the North to continue the war. And so, in Harrenhal's gloom, he wrestled with strategies and moral dilemmas, always coming to the same conclusion. They must press south, no matter the cost, if there was to be any hope for Sansa's deliverance. He pressed a hand to the stiff muscles of his injured leg, testing the aches that never fully receded. In the weeks since Tywin's defeat near Riverrun, the leg had improved, and he walked more steadily now, though sometimes with the aid of a cane. He set it aside each morning, forcing himself to climb from bed without leaning on it, as if sheer will could banish his lingering frailty. After dressing in a simple tunic and breeches, he studied the maps spread across a makeshift table near the window. The battered roads leading to King's Landing formed winding trails on those parchments, each potentially guarded by roving Lannister bands, or by barons loyal to the crown, or even by leftover forces from the Mountain's men who might have splintered off once Gregor departed Harrenhal. The wide lands of the Crownlands and the Reach still lay between him and the city's high walls, and though Tywin's main host had been shattered, rumor suggested that House Tyrell was considering whether to intervene on behalf of the throne. They had not yet declared for the Boy King, but neither had they joined the rebellion. Ned considered them a wild card that might shift at a moment's notice. Another unknown to weigh on his mind. He heard footsteps approaching, firm and quick. A soft rap on the half-broken door announced his wife, Catelyn. He lifted his head, mustering a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. She entered with a nod to the guard lingering in the corridor, then pushed the door shut. Worry lined her face, but in the weeks since they had regained the upper hand, he saw flashes of her old strength. At least they were not besieged themselves any longer, though Harrenhal's bleak corridors were no place for comfort. Together, they had walked them the previous day, overseeing attempts to clean out half-collapsed halls and to gather the pitiful supplies Gregor had left behind. Catelyn carried a sheaf of papers, newly arrived messages from various allies in the Riverlands and the North. She set them down with a sigh. "They come in droves," she murmured. Letters from the Mallisters, from Lady Manderly, from Karstark, confirmations that they stand ready, or updates about how many men they can bring. But also too many pleas for security. Many are afraid the war might ravage their lands if the realm shatters further. Ned ran his fingers over the topmost note, scanning the bold lines. "We'll need them all," he said quietly. "King's Landing has tens of thousands of inhabitants, and though I doubt more than a fraction can fight, the city is well defended. The Gold Cloaks remain loyal to Joffrey, if only out of fear and coin. We cannot storm such a fortress with empty pockets. We'll need a true host, if only to make the threat of siege credible." Catelyn nodded, but her lips thinned with frustration. "We must move soon, Ned. We cannot linger here in this cursed shell, or Sansa's time might run out. You've seen how Cersei words her threats. Joffrey's patience is not something we can rely on. Each day that passes, I fear he might do something monstrous to our girl, if only to spite us." He touched her arm gently. "I know. We won't stay longer than necessary, but we must gather what we can to ensure we don't meet disaster halfway to the capital." She closed her eyes, taking a moment to steady her breathing. "I'll see to the supply reports," she said at last. "We have wagon loads of grain from the Riverlands, but we'll need more fodder for the horses if we march quickly. Some roads are in ruin from Lannister raids. Roose Bolton's outriders are scouting them, but it's slow work." Ned smoothed out a rumpled corner of the map. And the next parley with Gregor's men has brought us no new revelations. They left Harrenhal behind without a single coherent plan, apparently. Our scouts tracked them, but it seems Gregor's forging east, perhaps to slip around us and eventually rejoin Tywin or push on to King's Landing. We can't worry about him yet. Once we're on the road, he might come at us from behind or vanish into the Crownlands. Either way, we'll hold Jaime as a hostage that might yet protect Sansa. If the Lannisters kill Sansa, we kill Jaime. Catelyn grimaced. It sickens me how we speak of life and death bargains like this. But I see no other way. Her voice caught, tears brimming in her eyes. Each day, I can't help but picture Sansa's face, how frightened she must be. He gathered her to him in a brief embrace, mindful that they had little time for private sorrows. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder, then drew back, eyes shining. If only we could slip a spy into the city. But the roads are watched, and the Queen likely has every gate under scrutiny. And we can't be sure who to trust among the capital's intrigues. Littlefinger, Varys. They serve themselves first. Ned's jaw tightened at the mention of Peter Baelish's name. In another life, perhaps he would have tried to use Peter's cunning, but Baelish's loyalties were as slippery as an eel. "We do what we must," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "I'll send another missive by Raven, repeating our terms. Likely it will do no good, but at least they'll know we approach. Perhaps that will keep them from harming Sansa immediately, if they think it might end her only chance of rescue." Catelyn exhaled shakily, then stepped away to the door. "I'll see to the quartermasters. Then we'll gather the lords for a midday council. Let's confirm that all is ready for the march." He inclined his head. "Yes, I'll join you." As she left, he lingered at the window a moment, letting the pale sunlight outline the twisted spires of Harrenhal. Memories flickered through his mind of that old tourney, of Lyanna and Rhaegar, of how the seeds of war had been planted here. Now, another war found itself entwined with these black walls. He prayed the gods would let this be the last war he would ever fight. Shortly afterward, Ned descended the grand but crumbling stairs into Harrenhal's great hall, which was too large and dark for comfort. Torches guttered in iron sconces, illuminating a patchwork of melted stone arches. The place smelled of dust, old ashes, and the faint tang of mold. Yet the floor was busy with a swirl of humanity. Soldiers carried benches in from the courtyard, lords conferred in hushed voices, and the few local peasants who had lived in Harrenhal's shadow milled about, unsure if this new occupation would be kinder than Gregor's. Maester Vyman had set up a table near the dais, scribbling feverishly on parchment. Several war captains, including Hallis Malin, stood with arms folded, waiting to speak to Ned. He signaled them to approach, and they reported that the perimeter around Harrenhal was secure, with no sign of Gregor returning. The lords from the north and the Riverlands began arriving for the midday meeting. Robb entered with a purposeful stride, helmet under one arm, cloak trailing behind. Jon Snow followed him, similarly geared from training in the yard. Arya darted in from the side, ignoring the pointed looks of knights who disapproved of a young girl wearing breeches and a sword at her hip. She took up a stance by the far wall, face set in determination. The great Jon Umber bellowed a greeting, pounding a meaty fist against his chest. Roose Bolton stepped into the hall as well, quiet and pale, flanked by men bearing the flayed man's sigil. Lord Karstark arrived soon after, glaring around as if he still harbored bitterness that his sons had been slain by the Lannisters. Mallister, Blackwood, Bracken, Vance, representatives of each Riverlord house filled the corners. Lady Manderly was absent, for she remained in White Harbor, but she had sent a trusted retainer who bowed stiffly to Ned. Brynden Tully, having scouted the fortress's labyrinth in the morning, returned covered in dust, shaking his head about the state of the castle's collapsed towers. Once they had all gathered, Ned stood at the dais, leaning lightly on his cane. The men and a few women arranged themselves in a half-circle. He began with a brief acknowledgement of their victory at Riverrun and their relatively bloodless acquisition of Harrenhal. Then, in a solemn voice, he declared that they would not tarry. "We march in 3 days," he said. "For King's Landing. We bring every able soldier we can spare. Our purpose is twofold: to force the crown to return my daughter, Sansa Stark, unharmed, and to end Lannister aggression upon the Riverlands and the North. If the Queen refuses, we must be prepared to lay siege. Let none imagine it will be easy. The city is vast, and though Tywin's host is scattered, the capital can muster more men from the Crownlands, plus the gold cloaks. The outcome is uncertain." A rumble of mutters passed through the crowd. Some carried the swagger of men hungry for more triumph, but others glanced uneasily at each other. Lord Karstark spat. "We crushed Tywin once, we can do it again. They have a boy king on the throne. All we must do is show them the North does not yield." Roose Bolton's voice emerged in a soft, chilling tone. "Do not underestimate the cunning of Queen Cersei. She might gather allies from the Reach or the Stormlands. Word is that Renly Baratheon has declared himself king in Highgarden circles. Stannis sits on Dragonstone, silent perhaps, but not idle. The realm is fracturing, and chaos often births new threats." Brynden Tully nodded agreement. "We may find King's Landing more chaotic than united. That could help us, or it could hamper us if new claimants muddy the waters." Robb stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Regardless, we have a duty to Sansa, and the Lannisters have forced our hand. We do not ride for blind conquest, only to free our kinswoman and see justice done for the ravages they unleashed on the Riverlands. If the Tyrells or any other house stands in our way, we'll face them, but let us hope they remain aloof." Lord Bracken, a thick-necked man with a scar across his cheek, growled that he doubted Mace Tyrell would risk a full-scale war with the North just to back a sadistic boy king. A few men hummed agreement. Others were less certain. Lady Manderly's retainer said that White Harbor was prepared to send more ships if they needed to blockade King's Landing by sea, though it would take time to coordinate. Ned listened, letting them voice concerns. Finally, he spoke firmly. "We will not live or die by speculation. Our plan is to march as one host. The road south toward Rosby and then the capital will be patrolled by outriders. Lord Bolton has agreed to lead the vanguard scouts once again. If the city yields Sansa at the sight of our army, then we might achieve a bloodless resolution. If not—" He paused, letting the implication hang. The Great Jon roared, "Then we'll tear those lion lovers from their pit and raise our banners on the Red Keep." That drew a wave of coarse cheers from men who had lost kin to Lannister steel. Ned allowed it, though inwardly, he prayed it would not come to that level of carnage. Once the meeting concluded, lords dispersed to see to their troops. Only Ned, Robb, Bolton, Brynden, and a handful of close advisors remained. Arya lingered on the edge, arms crossed, eyes glinting with pent-up urgency. Ned gave her a small nod, indicating she could stay. She had proven too stubborn to banish. Jon stepped up as well, prepared for whatever tasks might be assigned. Ned glanced at Bolton. "You and your outriders will leave by dawn tomorrow to ensure the roads are passable?" Bolton inclined his head. "Yes, we'll slip ahead, weed out bandits or leftover lion camps. By the time you march with the main column, the route should be secure. We'll leave signs if we discover anything ominous. Tyrell foragers, sellswords, or bandits." Ned gripped Bolton's arm briefly. "Good. And be wary of Gregor's men in the east. He might be prowling. We don't want him snipping at our flank." Bolton's smile was thin. "My men know how to handle dogs. The mountain will not surprise us." Brynden Tully coughed softly. "We'll keep a small garrison in Harrenhal, yes? In case the mountain doubles back or some petty warlord tries to snatch it. A handful of men, no more, to hold the gates. The fortress is an impossible beast to fully guard, but enough to deter opportunists." Robb nodded. "Yes, we can spare a few companies, though I doubt many want to remain in these haunted halls. The rest we bring south." Ned looked to Arya, who stared back defiantly as if expecting him to tell her she would be left behind. He sighed. "Arya, you ride with us toward the rear. You stay safe. I will not risk you, but I won't force you away." A flicker of gratitude crossed her face, though it was masked by boldness. "I can fight, father, if we're attacked." He gave a weary half-smile. "Don't go looking for trouble. That's all I ask." With final nods, they parted ways to prepare. Outside, the day had grown warm, and the stench of the fortress's old moat hung heavy in the air. Soldiers lugged crates of arrows or sacks of grain. Horses paced restlessly in the yard. Robb oversaw practice drills for the cavalry, while Jon led archers in forming ranks. The great Jon boomed jokes about Harrenhal's supposed ghosts, stomping around with a keg of ale to loosen men's nerves. Even so, tension thrummed among the ranks, for everyone knew King's Landing lay ahead, a formidable target. Some men whispered that if the North took the capital, perhaps they would crown Robb king in the North for good. Others muttered that the realm might tear itself apart in the process, fueling an even greater bloodbath. That evening, Ned dined on salted mutton in a small side hall with Catelyn, Arya, and a handful of lords. The mood was quiet, subdued by the oppressive ambience of Harrenhal's dilapidated corridors. Candlelight flickered across stone walls that bore scorch marks from Aegon's conquest centuries past. The conversation drifted toward home. How Winterfell fared under the stewardship of Maester Luwin, how Bran was healing from his injuries, how Rickon was too young to grasp the war's scale. Then it wandered back to Sansa, always Sansa, the focus of their rescue. At last, Catelyn pleaded exhaustion and withdrew, Arya trailing after her. Ned stayed a while longer, hearing small reports from lords who had patrolled the local hamlets to ensure no pockets of Lannister cruelty remained. When he finally climbed the stairs to his solar, the corridors were deserted, torches flickering in brass holders, casting jittery shadows. He paused at a window that overlooked the wide courtyard, noticing the ring of watchfires that encircled Harrenhal's perimeter. Beyond them stretched a moonlit haze, the plains and distant waters of the God's Eye. He found himself murmuring a prayer to the old gods for guidance in the days ahead. So much hinged on the next march. A knock startled him, and Jon Snow stepped into the hallway, glancing about as if uncertain. "Father," Jon said, voice hushed. "I just wanted to say, we'll be ready. My archers won't fail you." Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I know, son. We have good men. I trust your leadership. On the morrow, see that your men gather enough arrows for a prolonged engagement. King's Landing is not a quick raid." Jon nodded. For a moment, an unspoken tension hung between them, a reminder of the secret lying under the surface. Then Jon cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll do so. Good night." With that, he departed, footsteps fading into the gloom. Ned sighed, wishing he could offer more solace. But the war overshadowed all. At times he almost imagined the old curse of Harrenhal whispering through these passages, tightening the realm's woes. The next morning, Lord Bolton departed at dawn with his outriders, the hooves of hundreds of horses kicking up dust as they vanished eastward along the main road. The fortress felt emptier without the quiet menace of Bolton's presence. Yet Ned knew that the man's cunning would be invaluable in scouting ahead. The entire day was spent in frenzied readiness. Wagons were loaded, harnesses checked, rations doled out. Harrenhal's labyrinthine halls were left mostly empty except for the small garrison of men assigned by Brynden Tully. The direwolf and trout banners still hung from the ramparts, but soon their owners would ride away, leaving only a token force to hold the Black Fortress. Some men shuddered, whispering that Harrenhal never stayed with one lord for long, that a new master would displace them soon. On the second morning after Bolton's departure, Ned gave the command to march. He rode at the front with Robb, Malin, and a line of knights from the north, while Arya was tucked safely behind in a column of foot soldiers. Catelyn traveled with the baggage and supply wagons, overseeing logistics. Brynden Tully kept a portion of Riverlander cavalry near the center, ready to respond to any threat. The great Jon led a raucous contingent of men who sang bawdy marching songs, brandishing axes in the early sun. Lord Karstark's men marched with grim silence, thirsting for Lannister blood in memory of fallen sons. 2,000 cavalry led the van, followed by 5,000 foot, archers, and support staff, an impressive host, though not the largest the realm had ever seen. Enough, Ned hoped, to make the capital tremble. They wound east for several days, crossing the rolling terrain near the God's Eye. Streams and wooded pockets dotted the route, sometimes forcing them to halt while engineers built crude bridges or felled trees to clear a path. Outriders returned sporadically with news of Bolton's scouts pushing farther ahead. No sign of Gregor's main group, though a few burned farmsteads suggested the mountain had left a destructive trail. The peasants they encountered mostly fled at first, fearing more war, but some recognized the Stark banners and timidly approached for aid. Ned allowed the men to share small portions of bread and salt. He did not want to replicate the Lannisters' cruelty. Their mission was just, or so he told himself each time he saw children with hollow eyes. Night after night, they camped under the open sky. Tents sprang up across fields or meadows, bonfires crackling, knights polishing armor under torchlight, archers fletching arrows while exchanging rumors. Robb or Ned would convene with the chief lords around a small fire, discussing the day's progress. Arya would linger at the edge, refusing to be shooed away. Some nights, men recounted old tales of Robert's rebellion or the sack of King's Landing, stirring unpleasant memories for Ned. He would retire to his tent, wishing for news that might prove Sansa was yet unharmed. But the Queen's silence was eerie and unyielding, as though Cersei was biding her time, confident that Joffrey's hold on the city would suffice. By the 10th day of marching, the lands had grown flatter, the roads more traveled. They encountered columns of refugees fleeing in the opposite direction, small folk who had abandoned the Crownlands, fearing more conflict. Some recognized the Stark banners, calling out half pleas, half accusations, blaming lords for the endless war. Ned's men gave what little help they could, but the sight weighed on him heavily. A realm at war spilled suffering far and wide, and it was no consolation that Tywin had begun this escalation, for now all paid the price. On the 12th morning, outriders reported a small Lannister scouting party ahead, perhaps 15 men, who had spotted Bolton's advanced guard and fled south. Bolton gave chase, capturing a few. Under interrogation, they revealed that King's Landing was indeed bracing for a siege, and that the Queen had called every loyal house to reinforce the capital. No mention of Tyrells or Baratheons yet, but tension simmered. Ned read the reports grimly. The day of confrontation drew nearer. Late that afternoon, Ned halted the army near a shallow stream. A weary hush lay over the columns as men set camp. The Great Jon grumbled for more action. Karstark paced with restless energy, and Robb frowned at a battered map, trying to gauge the best approach to the city. They had maybe 4 or 5 days of travel left before King's Landing's walls would appear on the horizon. That night, Ned convened a council with the major lords: Robb, Bolton, Brynden, Karstark, the Great Jon, and Catelyn. Jon and Arya were also present, standing quietly near the tent's entrance. Torchlight danced across tired, determined faces. Bolton spoke in his measured tone. The city has a ring of farmland and minor lordships before the main gates. We could attempt a direct approach along the Rosby Road or skirt around to the north, nearing the Antlers region to avoid any watchers. Either way, we must assume the Queen posted pickets. We won't achieve total surprise, but we can choose a path that minimizes conflict with any outlying loyalists. Robb traced a path on the map. A direct approach might be best. We have to show our banners, let them see the size of our force. If we slink in from the side, it could complicate matters. We want them to know we mean to negotiate for Sansa's release under threat of siege. Ned studied the lines. Yes, a bold approach might carry more weight, but the Queen might respond by sending her forces out to meet us. If Joffrey is reckless, he could open the gates and sally forth. The gold cloaks are numerous, though not necessarily skilled. Still, an open-field engagement near the city might cause chaos. Karstark glowered. If they come out, we crush them in sight of their precious walls, perhaps forcing them to yield quickly. No better place to show them the futility of resisting the north. Catelyn frowned. But if a battle rages, what happens to Sansa inside the city? The Queen might harm her out of spite, or Joffrey might do it in a fit of rage. We must keep that possibility at the forefront. We can't lose Sansa in the chaos." A heavy silence followed. Brynden Tully ran a hand through his graying hair. "We'll send envoys the moment we're within sight of the walls. Demand an audience, reiterate our terms. If they harm Sansa at any sign of battle, we kill Jaime, and the war continues to the bitter end. But if they wish to avoid a siege, they might consider letting her go." Bolton's face showed no emotion. "We hold all the cards in terms of raw force, but the Queen holds Sansa. That single hostage tips the scale. We must be prepared to see the worst if they choose madness." Arya's breath hitched, and she spoke without waiting for permission. "If they kill Sansa, we kill Jaime, that's the bargain. But I swear, if they do it, I'll personally kill Joffrey." She looked to Ned, eyes blazing. No one rebuked her outburst, for the entire tent shared her frustration. Ned exhaled. "All we can do is proceed carefully. We cannot let them think us weak or indecisive. We show strength but offer a chance to yield. That will be our stance. We must pray the gods see Sansa safe through this." A subdued agreement rippled around the tent. Plans were made for dividing the columns once they neared the city, to flank both the Rosby Road and the King's Gate. They would not fully encircle the massive walls without more men, but they could block key roads, controlling access. The meeting broke, men drifting to their bedrolls or out to the fires. Ned sat a while longer with Catelyn, who pressed a hand to her brow, eyes red from tears not yet shed. He pulled her close, whispering that they had come too far to fail. She leaned into his warmth, nodding. They parted for the night, each alone in their worries. The following days blurred in a relentless march. The land grew more populous, scattered villages and small holdfasts dotting the fields. People watched the army pass with terrified awe, some tossing out meager offerings to avoid being deemed traitors. Ned's men refrained from looting. The North's moral code was to keep the war honorable, though the concept of honor rang hollow in so many hearts after the horrors they had witnessed. The nights turned cooler, but tension burned hotter in the ranks. At dawn of the 20th day since leaving Riverrun, the Outriders spotted the first glimpses of King's Landing's outer fields, the sprawl of farmland that fed the city. Smoke rose from countless chimneys in the distance, indicating the massive settlement. They halted in a wide meadow that evening, setting a sprawling camp. Men whispered in hushed tones that the city lay but half a day's ride beyond the next ridge. Torches glimmered across the darkness, likely watchers posted by the crown. The final confrontation was near. Ned walked among the tents, cane in hand, silent. The Great Jon and others roamed, bellowing that the morrow might see them at the gates. Karstark's men sharpened swords, hungry for vengeance. Bolton's outriders confirmed a ring of pickets near the city outskirts. The swirl of anxiety made it hard to sleep. Jon found Arya practicing with needle by torchlight near a quiet corner of camp. She stabbed at a burlap sack tied to a post, her breaths ragged. Jon gently told her to rest, that the next day would be eventful enough. She only glared, refusing at first, but eventually lowered the sword, exhaustion creeping into her stance. Neither spoke of the horrors that might await them inside the city. They parted without words, each lost in private dreads. Ned lay in his tent, hearing the distant murmur of the army. Night birds called from the dark, the smell of damp grass mixed with cooking fires. He remembered coming to King's Landing so many moons ago with Robert's invitation, how he had dreaded the South but never imagined this scale of war. He thought of all that had happened since, the discovery that Joffrey was no true Baratheon, the imprisonment of Ned himself, the flight from the capital, Robert's death, and overshadowing all, the plight of Sansa, forced to remain in the Queen's claws. His guilt gnawed at him that he had not foreseen this trap. If only he had confronted the truth more boldly at the start, could he have saved the realm from this madness? But regrets offered no path backward, only forward remained. He resolved to do everything in his power to spare Sansa now, and to spare the men of the North needless slaughter if a peaceful resolution was possible. Yet with the Lannisters, he had learned, peace rarely came without a blade at one's throat. When dawn arrived, the camp rose early, mustering with grim efficiency. Banners were unfurled, armor donned, and war horses saddled. Ned led from the front with Robb, their cloaks flapping in a light breeze. Lady Catelyn and Arya rode behind the main lines, near the supply wagons, guarded by 100 stalwart knights. The Great Jon took a right flank, Karstark the left, Bolton the vanguard with his outriders already forging ahead. They advanced over the final ridge, and soon, the metropolis of kings landing spread before them in the distance. A patchwork of thousands of rooftops, the high walls curling around the city's perimeter, and above all, the Red Keep perched on its promontory. Beyond, the Blackwater Bay glimmered in morning light. Horns signaled the host's arrival. A murmur rippled through the soldiers as the largest city in Westeros loomed. Though not as massive as some exotic free cities, to many Northmen who had never traveled so far south, King's Landing seemed an endless sprawl. Even from miles away, they could see smoke rising from countless chimneys, a haze that hung above the rooftops. Ned signaled a halt atop a gentle slope, letting the columns form ranks. They were still beyond arrow range, but any watchers on the city's walls would see the dust and flash of steel. The Queen would know they were here. Bolton and a handful of scouts approached from a gallop, reining up near Ned. Bolton's voice held that eerie calm. "We tested their outer pickets. They fell back to the city gates. The crown's banners are visible on the ramparts, likely the gold cloaks. They have not sallied out, at least not yet. We saw no sign of Tyrell involvement, nor any pitched fortifications outside the walls." Robb peered at the city. "They must be prepared to hole up inside. A siege, if it comes to that." Ned nodded gravely. "We'll advance to within hailing distance and announce ourselves. If they have sense, they'll speak with us. Hallis Malin, you'll bear our standard, and we'll present terms again. We want Sansa alive and free, and we still hold Jaime Lannister. If they defy us, we proceed." They trotted forward, a cautious approach. The roads here were broad, lined with scattered farmsteads. Nervous small folk watched from shuttered windows, some fleeing to the city with bundles. No official parley emerged, no outriders from the crown. It was as if the city had sealed itself shut. At last, the northern columns halted a quarter-mile from the main gate, known as the King's Gate. Beyond a wide field, the gatehouse reared high, a bastion of stone bristling with archers and scorpions. Gold cloaks in yellow cloaks patrolled the battlements, apparently watchful. A hush spread among the northern men, tension thick in the air. Ned rode forward with Robb and a small detachment, bearing a white flag of truce. Archers hovered behind them, bows half-drawn in case the city responded with violence. Hallis Malin bellowed for parley, his voice echoing across the open ground. "In the name of Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, we call for the crown to meet us and hear our demands." His shout carried, followed by a beat of silence. Then more silent moments stretched. At last, a single figure clad in golden plate emerged onto the rampart, calling down that the city recognized no traitor's authority. Ned cringed inwardly, remembering how they had labeled him a traitor months before. But his voice remained steady as he called out from below. "We do not come to conquer the city, but to demand the release of my daughter, Sansa Stark. We hold Ser Jaime Lannister's life in our hands, so think carefully. Let us speak without bloodshed." The figure conferred with others behind the battlement, then shouted that the Queen Regent had given orders. "No one from the Stark army may enter, no parley is to be given, unless they first free Jaime." The terms were the same as ever, an impasse. Ned's heart sank. "If you refuse, we will blockade your city," he warned. "If Sansa is harmed, Ser Jaime dies. Do not test us." The gold cloaks offered no further reply, only manning their scorpions with a visible readiness. A standoff. Sick with frustration, Ned and Robb retreated to the lines. The Great Jon cursed loudly, demanding they storm the gates at once. Karstark hissed that it was madness to attack such high walls. Brynden Tully said they should encamp, cut off supply lines, force the capital into a siege. Ned agreed, for the moment. He had no illusions of breaching King's Landing in a direct assault with minimal siege machinery. And a lengthy siege risked Sansa's life daily. Yet what else could they do? Thus began a strangling blockade. The northern army spread out around the city's main gates, forming camps near each approach road, while the Riverlanders took positions near the southern roads. Bolton's men scoured the outlying farmland, capturing or dispersing crown pickets. The watch from atop the city walls remained vigilant but did not sally forth. Night fell on a stalemate. Fires twinkled across the countryside as Ned's men hunkered down. Inside those high walls, the Queen and her son presumably watched and waited, confident in their thick defenses. The next morning, Ned composed another letter, demanding a parley or else they would starve King's Landing. He repeated that Jaime's fate hinged on Sansa's safety. A rider in Stark colors approached the gate to deliver it, but the gold cloaks refused to open. At last, a basket was lowered by rope, the letter placed inside, then hoisted up. No immediate response followed, leaving Ned's host to simmer in growing impatience. 3 days of tense blockade dragged on. The city gates remained shut. Occasional catapult shots from the walls soared overhead, mostly aimed at any northern siege works under construction, forcing Ned's men to keep their distance. A few men were wounded by crossbow bolts when they ventured too close. The watchers saw the city's wharves in the distance, with ships still able to come and go by sea. That meant the blockade was incomplete unless Ned found a way to close off the harbor. They had some ships from White Harbor, but not enough to fully blockade the bay. The city might hold out for months if well provisioned. Catelyn paced their command tent in the field, dread plain on her face. We'll never starve them out if they can resupply by ship. Meanwhile, Sansa remains at Joffrey's mercy. How long before the Queen decides we bluff? Or Joffrey does something cruel? Robb scowled, arms folded. We need a decisive act. If we had more ships, we could blockade the Blackwater. Lady Manderly's fleet is too small, and it's weeks away. Father, could we attempt a night assault on the walls? If we gained a foothold, Ned shook his head gravely. We'd lose hundreds, maybe thousands, in a direct assault. Sansa might die in the chaos. We must be more strategic. He looked to Bolton, who hovered near. What if we feign a retreat, lure them into sallying out? Then we ambush them in open ground. If we won a major victory, maybe the Queen would yield. Bolton's eyes were half-lidded. We could try, but the gold cloaks might not be so bold, especially if the Queen fears losing her guard. She wants to keep Sansa as a shield. She gains nothing by open battle unless she has hidden allies we do not suspect. Brynden Tully rapped knuckles on a map. Renly Baratheon has proclaimed himself king in the south. Stannis remains on Dragonstone. Perhaps the Queen hopes one of them intervenes, or the Tyrells do. The realm is in turmoil, and we stand at the gates with no sure means of cracking them. Time does not favor us if reinforcements slip in by sea. A hush settled. Arya, standing in a corner, broke it by stepping forward, voice trembling with anger. This is monstrous. We're so close, but we can't reach Sansa. She turned to Ned. Father, can't we try to slip in with a small group? Some infiltration to find her. Spirit her out. Ned sighed. The city is huge and the Red keep well guarded. We'd never manage it unseen, especially with the Queen vigilant. I cannot risk you or more men on such a near-suicide mission. Arya's face twisted, but she fell silent. Ned squeezed his brow, feeling the stress weigh like a boulder on his shoulders. The only advantage they had was Jaime's life. If the Queen believed them serious about killing him if Sansa died, perhaps she would hold off. But it did nothing to free Sansa. Each passing day felt like a coil tightening around them all. That evening, a new stir erupted along the lines when a rider approached under a white banner from the city's side. Men rushed to see if it was a parley at last. Ned hastened with Robb, Arya, and others, organizing a cautious meeting. They found a lone messenger in green and gold livery, evidently a court herald. He halted 100 yards from the camp, trembling as the great Jon and others encircled him. Ned arrived, stepping forward, cane in hand. The herald bowed stiffly. I come bearing words from Her Grace, the Queen Regent Cersei Lannister, on behalf of King Joffrey Baratheon. She demands an immediate audience with Lord Eddard Stark, under neutral conditions, to discuss terms. She invites Lord Stark to come to the city gates with a retinue of no more than 5 men, at midday tomorrow, for a face-to-face parley with the king and queen. This is the only condition under which negotiations will proceed. Ned's heart pounded. A parley, face-to-face with Joffrey and the queen? Do they guarantee my safety? If this is a trap, the herald lowered his gaze. She promises Lord Stark may depart freely once the parley ends, so long as no violence is done within the walls. Within the walls? Robb echoed. They mean to bring you inside? That's madness. The herald cleared his throat. Not within the Red Keep, but near the Gate of the Gods. They'll lower the portcullis behind you to ensure no infiltration by your men. But the queen insists on your presence in the city's threshold, with only 5 companions. Otherwise, no parley will occur. A surge of outrage flared among Ned's knights. They demanded the queen come out instead. But the herald only repeated his instructions, then waited with bowed head, as if bracing for violence. Ned ground his teeth, recalling how he had once trusted the queen's words in King's Landing and nearly lost his head. Yet refusing might end all hope of a negotiated release for Sansa. Risking it might lead to a second capture or worse. Robb grabbed Ned's arm. Father, you cannot trust her. She wants you cornered, separated from our army. This is how they took you last time. Catelyn arrived in time to hear the gist. She went pale. It's a trap. She knows you'd do anything for Sansa. Ned turned to the herald. If we accept, my safety is guaranteed to come and go? The herald nodded stiffly. Yes, my lord. The queen gave her word. The king has declared any betrayal be punishment upon the city itself. But I cannot speak for their hearts, only repeat their vow. Ned exhaled. Return to your queen. Tell her I will come, with 5 companions only, to the Gate of the Gods at midday tomorrow. If she breaks her word, this entire city will drown in blood, and Ser Jaime Lannister's head will adorn a spike in Riverrun. Let her know that. The herald swallowed. Yes, my lord. He bowed low, then spurred his horse, galloping back to the walls under watchful stares. Robb whirled on Ned, face tight with alarm. Father, N. Ned's voice was quiet but resolute. What other choice do we have? We've gained no ground in 2 weeks. Sansa remains captive, and a siege might doom her. This may be a chance to talk sense into them, or at least confirm her condition. If the queen breaks faith, we'll hold Jaime's death over their heads. Perhaps that alone will keep me safe. Arya's eyes were wide. She wants revenge on you. She might not care about Jaime anymore if Joffrey is raging for your blood. Catelyn's nails bit into her palms. Don't go, Ned. Send Robb or me. They only asked for Stark leadership, not specifically you. Ned shook his head firmly. Cersei singled me out. This is about my daughter, about the old accusations of treason. She wants me. I will not hide behind others. If Sansa is there, if I can see her, we might negotiate. Robb's frustration simmered. Then take me as one of your 5, at least. Ned's chest tightened. Yes, I will. You, Jon Snow, and 2 others who can fight if things go ill. That is all. The rest must remain here, ready to move if the queen betrays us. The great Jon offered to go, Karstark too, but Ned refused them both. Too loud or too vengeful. He needed calm heads, not men who might spook the queen's guards. Bolton simply dipped his head, as though amused by this turn, and said he would remain to command the lines if Ned was taken. Ned accepted that arrangement, though it chilled him to imagine leaving the entire host in Bolton's hands if tragedy struck. With the plan set, the camp roiled in discontent. Men cursed the queen for daring to summon Ned alone, but Ned repeated that it was their one window for peace. That night he barely slept, his thoughts a storm of possibilities. Would the queen use Sansa as a living shield, forcing Ned to comply with demands he could not fulfill? Would Joffrey order Ned's head on the spot? But if Ned refused the parley, Sansa might suffer anyway, and the war would grind on. Even as dread gnawed at his heart, he recalled his duty, to protect his children above all. He clung to that, praying the queen's vow was not hollow. When dawn broke, Ned rose early, dressing in plain riding leathers beneath mail. He strapped Ice, the ancient greatsword of House Stark, across his back. His leg ached, but he willed the pain aside. Catelyn tried once more to dissuade him, tears in her eyes, but he only kissed her brow gently. "We cannot run from this," he told her. "If there's a chance Sansa might be freed, or at least we can ensure she's alive, I must take it." She pressed her lips together, anguish plain. Arya hovered, fists balled, wanting to volunteer in place of Jon, but Ned forbade it. "No, you must remain safe," he said. He clasped her shoulder. "Pray for me, little one, and pray for your sister." Outside, the morning sky was pallid and overcast, as if the heavens themselves trembled. The host roused, forming ranks to watch. Ned and his chosen 5 mounted up. Robb on a warhorse, Jon on another, Harrenhal, plus 2 northern knights named Garrick and Thorin, both steady men who had served Ned for years. They carried Stark banners and wore only modest armor, to show they did not intend battle. A hush lay over the encampment as they trotted out, heading for the Gate of the Gods. The rest of the army stood ready, archers knocking arrows behind makeshift breastworks, cavalry prepared to charge if a signal sounded that Ned was betrayed. The city walls loomed, crowded with gold cloaks peering down. At the Gate of the Gods, the portcullis was lifted a few feet, no more. Ned could see shadows in the archway, for Lannister guards in matching plate waited in front, presumably to greet them. The approach felt surreal, stepping so near to the site of his earlier imprisonment. The memory of the Red Keep's dungeon stung, but he forced composure, glancing at Robb's taut face and Jon's set jaw. Harrenhal looked grim, hand on his sword hilt. They halted within shouting distance. One guard stepped forward, announcing he would lead them inside to the courtyard just beyond the gate, where the queen and king awaited. Ned dismounted, telling the others to do likewise. They moved carefully, scanning for hidden archers. The guard gestured that only the 6 of them might pass under the portcullis. They obliged, leaving their horses behind. With a creak of chains, the gate opened a fraction more, enough for them to walk inside single file. Ned's heart hammered. Robb and Jon flanked him closely, eyes darting. They stepped into a wide courtyard, walled on all sides by stone ramparts and towers. Ahead waited a small retinue of gold cloaks, 2 Kingsguard knights in white cloaks, and behind them, upon a raised platform of wooden planks, stood Queen Cersei Lannister in regal green silks, golden hair pinned high. Beside her, perched on a makeshift throne of carved oak, sat King Joffrey, wearing a crown of gold and ruby. Ned's jaw clenched at the sight of that smug, vicious boy. Off to one side, in plain garb, Ned glimpsed Sansa Stark. Alive, his heart jolted with relief. She wore a pale gown, her hair pulled back, face wan and anxious. Her eyes flickered with shock and hope upon seeing him. A row of gold cloaks formed a half-circle, bristling with spears. Overhead, archers likely lined the walls. The queen's expression was cold triumph. Joffrey's lips curved in a cruel smirk. Sansa stood with her hands clasped, tears threatening. Ned wanted to rush to her, but the ring of steel warned him to keep his distance. Cersei's voice carried across the courtyard. "Lord Eddard Stark, you have come to do homage to the rightful king, I trust. You bring only 5 men, as agreed." Her green eyes flicked to Robb and Jon behind him, measuring them. Ned forced calm into his reply. "Yes, we come in peace to negotiate. I see my daughter there. Let her approach me." Joffrey snorted. "You will remain where you are, traitor, until we decide otherwise." Cersei laid a hand on Joffrey's shoulder, silencing him. She smiled thinly at Ned. "Your daughter is well enough for now, but that depends on your cooperation. Speak your demands, and we shall speak ours." Ned clenched his fists, resisting the urge to let anger rule. "We demand Sansa's immediate release and safe passage from the city. We have Jaime Lannister in our custody. So long as Sansa remains unharmed, Jaime lives. If you kill her, Jaime dies. We do not wish further bloodshed, but we will not surrender our daughter." Joffrey leaned forward with a sneer. "You dare threaten us? I am the king. I ought to have your head on a spike again. This time it will stay there. I should do it now, if not for Mother telling me to wait." He shot a glare at Sansa, who trembled in place. Hallis Malin stiffened, hand drifting to his sword. Robb and Jon glared, tension coiling. Cersei raised her other hand, commanding calm. "We do not dismiss your threat, Lord Stark, but let us be clear. Your hold on Jaime means nothing if King's Landing is secure behind walls. Your northern host cannot break the city easily. So here is our proposal. You shall free Jaime at once, send him unharmed to the capital, and swear fealty to King Joffrey. In return, we graciously allow Sansa to depart with you, if you pledge never again to raise arms against the throne. The North may remain under your wardenship, as before." A hush fell. Ned read the harsh lines of the Queen's face, the simmering cruelty in Joffrey's eyes. To bend the knee again, after all that had happened, to free Jaime unconditionally. This was the same ultimatum they had demanded from afar. "You cannot truly believe we would yield," Ned said, voice shaking with the effort to remain polite. "Tywin's army was broken. Your hold on the realm is tenuous. Why should we kneel to a boy king who threatened my daughter's life?" Cersei's eyes blazed. "Because if you do not, Sansa will be punished, and your siege will gain you nothing. Even if you starve the city, you'll be murdering thousands of innocents, all while your precious daughter rots in a tower. By the time you break these walls, Joffrey will have had his fill of cruelty, and you'll find only a corpse. Is that what you want, Stark?" A ragged breath left Ned. He looked to Sansa, who whimpered softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her eyes pleaded with him. He felt every inch of fatherly agony in that moment, longing to sweep her up, to shield her from this vile cruelty. Jon and Robb exchanged furious glances, uncertain whether to speak. Hallis Malin nearly growled. "You dare hold her as a hostage?" Joffrey banged his small fist on the wooden seat. "Quiet, dog. I am the king. I choose if the girl lives. One more insult, and I'll feed her to the crows in front of your eyes." His face twisted with sadistic glee. Robb trembled, tears of rage welling. Ned raised a hand to hold him back, trying to remain calm. "Is this how you rule, Joffrey? By terrorizing an innocent girl? You are no true king if you cannot." Joffrey screeched, "Traitor! I should kill you where you stand." At once, archers above knocked arrows, and Ned's party tensed. The Queen seized Joffrey's shoulder, murmuring into his ear, probably urging restraint. Sansa emitted a stifled sob. Silence thickened, poised on a knife's edge. Then Cersei leaned forward, voice dripping with menace. "You see, Stark, you are at our mercy. We are giving you one chance. Bend the knee, release Jaime, or your daughter's fate is sealed. You have this day to decide. If you do not return by dusk with your decision, Joffrey will decide her punishment himself. I doubt you'll like the result. Now be gone." She flicked her hand, an imperious gesture. Gold cloaks stepped closer, brandishing spears. Robb spat at the ground, eyes anguished. Ned forced his gaze to Sansa one last time. She mouthed something, perhaps "Father, please." Then the guards motioned them to retreat the way they had come. Joffrey glared. Cersei wore a cat-like smile, and Sansa wept silently. No final words were spoken. With hearts heavy, Ned and his companions backed out under the gatehouse, leaving the city behind. The portcullis dropped with a thunderous clang behind them. Outside, they mounted their horses in grim silence. The watchers from the northern lines saw their dark expressions and knew the parley had gone poorly. By the time they reached the command camp, Catelyn ran forward, face ashen. "Ned, did you see Sansa? Is she all right?" He dismounted slowly. "She's alive, terrified. They want me to yield, free Jaime, and swear fealty. Else they threaten to kill her. They gave me until dusk." A hush fell over all who heard, traveling like a wave through the ranks. Anger and horror brewed, men cursing the Lannisters. Arya stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We can't let them just kill her." Robb's voice shook. "We can't free Jaime. That undoes everything we fought for." Jon looked to Ned, torn. "But if we don't, Sansa." Karstark roared that they should storm the city. The Great Jon argued for a swift assault. Others insisted that was suicide. Catelyn clutched Ned's tunic, voice desperate. "They're bluffing, aren't they? They wouldn't dare kill her if it means losing Jaime." Ned closed his eyes, anguish scrawled on his features. "Joffrey is cruel enough to do it. And perhaps the Queen believes our threats of Jaime's death are hollow. We stand on the brink of unspeakable tragedy." In hushed council, they debated every possibility. A stealth rescue? Impossible. A feigned surrender? Then betrayal? The Queen might see it coming. A full siege assault? Countless would die, and Sansa might be the first victim. Time bled away, each passing minute tightening the noose. Evening shadows stretched across the camp, the city walls looming in the near distance. The Queen demanded a final answer by dusk. Tension soared to a fever pitch. Catelyn sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Robb paced like a caged wolf. Arya hovered, nails biting into her palms. Ned sat on a wooden stool, face pale with indecision. He could not break faith with the North and free Jaime, throwing away every man's sacrifice. Nor could he condemn Sansa. A torment of fatherhood clashed with the demands of war. The lords, pressed for time, gave him conflicting advice. Karstark demanded no surrender. The Great Jon roared that one girl's life was not worth the realm. Others looked away, uneasy. At last, Ned rose, leaning on his cane. "I must see Sansa safe," he whispered. "I will not lose my child to this madness. If that means letting Jaime go, so be it. We can still fight another day, keep the North free. But Sansa must be freed." Uproar ensued. Men shouted that this would betray the cause, that all the war's efforts meant nothing if they simply bent the knee again. Some threatened to leave if Ned caved. But Catelyn, tears streaming, grabbed Ned's hand. "Our daughter's life is everything. We cannot sacrifice her. We'll find another path if the Lannisters betray us again." Robb's face twisted with heartbreak. "Father, I can't watch Sansa die. I can't. But how can we let that wretch Joffrey keep the throne unchallenged?" Ned pressed a trembling hand to Robb's shoulder. "We accept their terms for now. Once Sansa is free, we can regroup. Perhaps gather new alliances. But we will not sacrifice her. That is final." A hush followed, broken only by Bolton's sardonic murmur. "Then let us pray the Queen keeps her word. If she obtains Jaime, we lose our best leverage. She might kill Sansa anyway, but I see no better path. War is a cruel mistress." Dusk neared. The entire camp felt the weight of this choice. Ned wrote a short letter addressed to the Queen. "We yield. We will send Jaime Lannister to your gates. Release Sansa at once, unharmed. The North renounces further rebellion, so long as you do not harm her or our people. We keep Robb's title as warden in the North. We beg clemency for all." Then he signed Eddard Stark with a trembling hand. The plan was to ride again to the city gates, present the letter, and then hold a short exchange. Sansa out, Jaime in. Tidy, albeit humiliating. Men grumbled in despair and anger, seeing their valor undone. But if the alternative was to let Sansa die, Ned could not do it. He arranged a raven to fly at once to Riverrun, where Jaime was guarded. The instructions were to release Jaime into a small escort heading swiftly to King's Landing. It would take time, a day or more, but the Queen must know they had complied. At the gates, Ned would plead for Sansa's immediate return, trusting the Queen's vow that Sansa lived so long as Ned obeyed. A frantic final step. He had no illusion Cersei would not find new ways to trap them, but Sansa's life mattered above all. Dusk fell in a blaze of crimson clouds over the city. Ned, accompanied by Robb and a small retinue once more, approached the Gate of the Gods with the letter. Drums pounded from the city walls, archers peering down. The same courtyard scene awaited, though this time only a minor official came forth, not the Queen or Joffrey. Ned presented the parchment, stating his acceptance of terms. Jaime would be sent at once, while Ned awaited Sansa's safe release. The official read it, lips curling in a sneer, then withdrew behind the gatehouse. Ned waited, tension coiled in every fiber. Catelyn had begged him not to go in person, but he insisted on showing sincerity. Minutes ticked by. The city gates remained shut. Anxious, Ned looked to Robb, who clutched his sword's pommel. Hallis Malin muttered that this stank of betrayal. Then, suddenly, the gate creaked open a fraction, letting out a single figure, stumbling on trembling legs. Sansa. She wore a hooded cloak, her face streaked with tears. She was prodded by a gold cloak holding a spear behind her, who then shoved her forward. She half fell onto the muddy ground just outside the gate. Ned's heart soared with relief. She was free. He rushed forward, Robb at his side. Sansa rose shakily, eyes wide as she recognized them. "Father!" she breathed in a broken voice. Ned caught her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. He felt her sob against his chest, all the tension in his body pouring into that moment of gratitude. Robb stroked her hair, tears shining. Hallis Malin and the guards stood in a ring, wary of a trick. But none came. The gate slammed shut behind her. Over the walls, a mocking voice called, "Keep your vow, Stark. Send Jaime swiftly. The king does not wait." Ned barely heard them, too consumed by Sansa's presence. She was thinner, bruises on her wrists, but alive. He held her trembling form, murmuring that it would be all right now, that they would go home. Robb's tears wet his cheeks as he clasped her hand. At last, Ned guided her onto a horse behind Hallis. She buried her face in the guard's cloak, sobbing. As they turned away, the men rode back to the main camp. Stunned soldiers parted for them. Arya rushed forward with a cry the moment they approached, tears streaming as she flung arms around Sansa, who slid from the saddle. The sisters clung to each other, all heartbreak forgotten in that reunion. Catelyn rushed in, arms embracing both daughters, weeping freely. The entire host watched, a hush of awe and relief, though some with uneasy glances, remembering that the price was Jaime's release and the subjugation to a boy king. Ned dismounted, standing by them, exhausted from relief and dread. Sansa was safe for the moment. The realm's future remained uncertain, for the queen would demand fealty, and Tywin might regroup. But for this instant, he let go of it all, cradling his rescued daughter as if she were a newborn. Sansa gazed up at him, eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Joffrey, he threatened me every day." "I know," Ned said, voice hoarse. "It's over now. We'll keep you safe." Around them, men muttered about the queen's next steps, about whether they truly must lay down arms. But Ned held up a hand, reminding them that while Jaime's release was in motion, the final outcome was not yet sealed. "Let us see if the queen honors her side now that Sansa is free," Ned said, though he was not naive. He suspected Cersei believed the North broken by love of a single child. In that, she might have miscalculated, for though Ned had yielded for Sansa's sake, the rest of the realm might yet rise. That night, father and daughter talked for hours in the quiet of Ned's tent. Sansa recounted her captivity, how Joffrey had forced her to watch beatings, threatened to kill her if Ned did not surrender. She had been locked in small chambers, no visitors except Cersei, who would occasionally promise she'd be freed if Ned obeyed. She told how the city seemed on the edge of riots, how the people cursed the Lannisters for raising taxes and failing to feed them. Ned's gut churned, realizing King's Landing was a powder keg. If the queen had no stable plan, chaos might erupt. Sansa's eyes were haunted. She asked about Winterfell, about her siblings. Ned assured her of Bran's survival, that Rickon was safe, that Arya was here. At mention of the war's toll, tears fell anew. They drifted into an uneasy sleep, Sansa curled under blankets, refusing to be out of Ned's sight. Morning arrived with fresh tensions. The queen, through another herald, demanded immediate proof Jaime had been freed from Riverrun. Ned wrote again to Riverrun, urging haste. Days might pass for Jaime to ride here. Meanwhile, the Queen commanded Ned to kneel before Joffrey publicly outside the gates in acceptance of the crown's pardon. If he refused, the city would treat him as an enemy anew. Ned realized they were locked in a humiliating standoff, with Sansa physically safe but the Queen pushing for a show of submission. The army bristled, outraged that their lord might be forced to kneel to a false king. The Great Jon threatened open revolt if Ned did so. But Ned had made a vow to do what was needed to save Sansa's life. And it was not only hers but the entire North at risk. If the Queen rallied other southern houses to brand them traitors again, they might face an endless cycle of war. In a tense gathering with his lords, Ned revealed Cersei's new demand. Karstark spat. Bow to that boy who calls himself king? Unthinkable. We gave enough. We freed Sansa. Are we now to degrade ourselves entirely? Robb's face twisted. Father, there must be another way. She has no real power over us. Not if we keep Sansa safe from her now. But Ned shook his head solemnly. If we show defiance, they may find some pretext to recapture or kill Sansa the moment we try to leave. They hold the Red Keep, the city's gates, everything. We can't fight the entire city if they close the gates again. We must keep the peace, at least until Jaime arrives and the Queen is satisfied we kept our word. Then perhaps we can withdraw north. Catelyn gripped Ned's arm. Then what was all this war for? So many died. Are we truly bowing again to a boy king? Ned's voice was heavy. I do it for our daughter. For the North. We lost too much already. I cannot plunge us into another bloodbath on the city walls. Not with Sansa just rescued. We will do the minimum required, then leave. We'll see how the realm shifts after. It was a bitter pill. Some lords stormed out in anger, while others grudgingly accepted that war was no longer feasible with Sansa's life at stake. Even Arya struggled to contain her fury, though she understood Sansa's safety was the priority. Late that day, Ned rode forth with Robb at his side, leading a token retinue again. They approached the city gates, greeted by a small throng of gold cloaks who parted to reveal a wooden dais erected outside the walls, in plain view of watchers on the ramparts. Joffrey and Cersei appeared there, flanked by the Kingsguard, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt. The crowd inside the city hummed with curiosity, peasants pressing forward to see. Ned dismounted, advanced, and faced the dais. Robb stood behind him, fists clenched. Cersei's voice rang out. Do you acknowledge King Joffrey's rightful rule and yield your sword to him? All eyes turned to Ned. He steeled himself, remembering how Robert had once been his friend, how this boy was no true Baratheon. But to save countless lives, especially Sansa's, he forced the words. I acknowledge King Joffrey as the crowned king, by the Queen's word, he said, each syllable tasting like ash. Then, shaking, he drew ice from its scabbard, reversed it, and laid it at his feet in a gesture of fealty. Gasps went through the assembled men behind him, disbelief and outrage flickering in their eyes. Robb's face was a storm of resentment, but Ned did not look back. Joffrey smirked, glancing at Cersei. She nodded, pleased. Then the crown pardons you and yours, she declared. We shall await Ser Jaime's return. Once he is safely in our care, you may depart unmolested. Murmurs rippled. The Queen turned with a swirl of green silks, leading Joffrey away. The dais was left empty, the gold cloaks forming a barrier. Ned retrieved ice, trembling at the shame of it. Robb put a hand on his shoulder but said nothing, rage and heartbreak mingling in his eyes. They returned to the northern lines in silence. Men parted for them with lowered gazes, some spitting in disgust. Others blinked tears, recalling friends lost in battles to dethrone this very boy. Ned felt a hollow ache, but Sansa was safe now, and that mattered above all. He told himself they could rebuild, perhaps gather alliances to dethrone Joffrey in the future, or hope that the realm's new troubles would topple the Lannisters without Ned's direct involvement. The immediate crisis was survived, though at a terrible cost to Stark pride. In the subsequent days, the Northmen remained encamped near the city, uneasy neighbors with the gold cloaks. Tension persisted, but without open warfare. Letters flew between Riverrun and the camp, confirming Jaime's escort was on the way. Sansa recovered slowly, staying close to Arya, weeping at times over what she had endured. The Queen sent an occasional envoy, reminding Ned that if Jaime's arrival was delayed, the crown's mercy might wane. Ned endured each slight, biting back retorts. He felt less a lord than a father simply biding time to keep his daughter safe. At last, word came that Jaime was but half a day's ride away, escorted by a handful of Tully knights. The Queen demanded Ned attend the final exchange at the city gate. So he must. As dawn broke on that fateful morning, Ned gathered his men. The great Jon refused to come, seething at the humiliation. Karstark likewise. Only Robb, Jon, Hallis and a handful of loyal guards formed Ned's retinue. Arya and Sansa stayed behind, for Ned would not risk them near the Queen again. Catelyn hovered anxiously in the background. In mid-morning sun, Jaime arrived from the west, a bandage on his left arm, eyes glittering with contempt. He was accompanied by Tully knights who looked equally disgruntled. They halted near Ned's lines, releasing the Kingslayer into Ned's custody for the moment. Jaime sneered. "So here I am, returned to the Queen's loving embrace. I trust you enjoyed your war, Stark. All for nothing, was it? Unless you gained a scar or two." Ned's voice was cold. "Your sister wanted you alive for some reason, so she kept Sansa as a hostage. Now you'll rejoin them. Remember, if they harm my daughter further, you'll be the first I come for." Jaime only laughed, flipping his golden hair. "How noble. We'll see how long that vow holds. My father might have a say in the matter too." With clenched teeth, Ned led them back to the city gates. The Queen, Joffrey, and a swarm of gold cloaks awaited. The Red Keep spires rose behind them. Jaime dismounted, stepping forward with a mocking bow to his nephew King, then to Cersei. She studied Jaime's face with relief, leaning to whisper in his ear. Joffrey smirked. Satisfied, the Queen turned to Ned. "You have kept your word, Lord Stark. Now begone from these lands. The King forbids you from approaching King's Landing again without summons. Return to your frozen north, and keep your daughter from any more insolence." Ned inhaled. "Sansa is free now. That was our agreement." Cersei waved a hand dismissively. "She is yours. Take her and all your rabble. The capital wants no more of you. Pray we do not find cause to call you traitors again." Joffrey looked ready to spew fresh insults, but Jaime murmured something, and the boy fell silent, though his scowl remained. The gold cloaks parted, leaving a corridor for Ned to depart. So it ended, with Ned glancing around at the city's walls, thinking of all the blood spilled in this war, only to end in an uneasy capitulation. He turned, motioning Robb and Jon to follow. Without a backward glance, the northern column withdrew, Jaime Lannister safely behind the lines with the Queen. No trumpets sounded, no final clash, just a bitter truce. They rode back to camp, where Sansa and Arya waited, along with Catelyn. Sorrow and relief mingled in the air. Sansa trembled, hearing that Jaime was free, that the vow was done. Some men in the ranks grew restless, asking what came next. Ned announced that they would dismantle the siege lines and return north, for the Queen had commanded it, and continuing to linger might put Sansa at risk once more. Murmurs of discontent spread. The great Jon cursed, threatening to gather his own men and press an attack anyway. But Ned's unwavering stance kept the host together. They had come to rescue Sansa, and she was freed. The cause had been personal, not about usurping the crown after all. So the men grumbled, yet followed orders, for none wanted to oppose Ned openly. That night, the northern camp lowered the banners. Catelyn wept with relief that the ordeal ended, though it felt hollow. Arya muttered that they had won but also lost, for Joffrey still sat the throne. Sansa clung to her mother, flinching at every mention of the Queen's name. Robb was stonily silent, caught between fatherly devotion and the lost chance to punish Joffrey. Jon spent hours helping men pack wagons, lost in his own thoughts of how the realm's dark tides might shift. All of them recognized that though Sansa was safe, the Lannisters remained in power, and the entire realm tottered on the brink of chaos. Was this truly peace, or merely the hush before a greater storm? At dawn, the North set out, accompanied by Rivelander allies who were equally frustrated but loyal to Ned's decision. They marched away from King's Landing, leaving the city's spires behind them. No farewell from the walls, no hail of arrows. The capital watched them go, locked in its own tumult. Sansa rode in a covered wagon with Catelyn and Arya by her side, weeping softly at intervals. Ned and Robb led from the front, faces grim. The great Jon brought up the rear, cursing under his breath about spineless southern kings. Bolton disappeared for stretches, quietly planning his own next moves in the power vacuum. Thus ended the war that Ned Stark had waged to save his daughter, culminating in a bitter stalemate. Tywin might yet regroup. The Queen might break her word if fresh opportunity arose. But for now, the North withdrew with Sansa alive. Ned prayed that perhaps, in the quiet days ahead, they could heal the scars of this conflict. If a new threat arose to challenge Joffrey's reign, maybe Ned's forced fealty would be undone. And maybe, in time, the realm would see the truth about the Lannisters. But for this moment, he counted his blessings that Sansa breathed free air again, that Arya was safe at her side, that the Rivellins were spared more ravages. Life, love, and family prevailed over pride. In the weeks that followed, as the northern host retraced the long roads home, rumors circulated of Stannis mustering ships on Dragonstone, of Renly forging alliances in the south, of the Tyrells stirring. The realm was a tinderbox, with the Lannisters perched precariously on the throne. Ned paid heed to these tales, uncertain if fate would one day call the North to war again. But for now, his duty was to bring Sansa back to Winterfell, to reunite the Stark children under one roof if possible, to let them find peace after the horrors they had witnessed. And behind them lay King's Landing, where Queen Cersei ruled with her cruel son, and where the ghost of a war half-finished lingered like a specter. Ned's footsteps carried him northward, but his thoughts drifted to the secrets still unspoken. Jon's parentage, the realm's fracturing. The storms of the great game might only be in their early throes. But at least he had wrested his daughter from the lion's jaws, and for Ned Stark, that was enough reason to face tomorrow's uncertainties with a measure of hope still burning, no matter how faint, amid the ashes of war.